Right, welcome to the Shamanic Freedom on Location, and this is the second podcast in a row that we're with Neil Kramer, and this rather ingenious idea manifested itself. That is that my girlfriend Anna, who's just done a degree in physics, knows an enormous amount of stuff about physics that a lot of us in the psychedelic community would like to be able to know, and she'll be able to answer a few of Neil Kramer's questions. One of those situations has just appeared, so I'm going to leave the next 20 minutes is I shall shut my cake hole and let Neil and Anna do the talking. So yeah, welcome both of you to Shamanic Freedom Radio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, cool. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, what I thought would be interesting, because I think I heard you mention when you were was it at the October Gallery, and you were with Anna and you were there, and you said that you were doing physics. Oh, that'd be interesting, you know, it'd be nice to meet her one day, and here we all are. So what interests me is that in the last year I've seen quite a few things in like popular science magazines and, you know, New Scientist and all that kind of stuff that's suggesting that in terms of actual matter, i.e. particulate matter, there really isn't any. And we just briefly mentioned that, didn't we, before, and you said, yeah, that's right, it's all theoretical. Tell us a bit about that, because I think that is very relevant to the mystical world of the shaman, if you like, which we just talked about a lot on this show. Just tell us about the science of actual particles and why there isn't anything there.
Yeah, it's the way that quantum mechanics work. It's if you look at the fundamental postulates, all they talk about is the results of measurements that can be made on the particle. There's not really a particle. So when you're not making a measurement, there's just nothing there. You can't. Experiments like a double slit can demonstrate that this picture of a particle is wrong.
Yeah, because when you were saying before, you were saying it as like a wave state and a particle state, but even that is just a sort of field of probability, not an actual thing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, the wave, you often hear about that in popular science, like quantum mechanics treatments, about the wave and the wave going through both slits. But actually, that's what we first learned in the first year lecture course in quantum mechanics is wave mechanics. You have fit a wave to the potential, and then from the wave function you can calculate things. But then in the next course, more advanced course, I learned that actually this wave, it's just the position representation of the mathematical object, which is actually the particle. Mathematical objects, it's called a vector in Hilbert space, which means it's just actually an element of a mathematical set, and the set has certain mathematical properties, but it's an entirely mathematical object.
What you're saying, does that mean that what you're talking about is purely a mathematical construct, it's not actually a thing?
Yeah, vector in Hilbert space is a purely mathematical construct.
Okay, so do they go into the fact that actually the atomic structure is just theoretical?
Yeah, it's just mathematics.
In what you've learned during your degree, would you say that there are no building blocks as such? That's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, you have this whole mathematical formalism, and you have a particle. Well, you need to say particle, otherwise you can't talk about it. It's a mathematical object called a vector in Hilbert space, which is just terminology you don't need to know. And if a conscious observer, the formalism of course doesn't mention consciousness, but it's kind of obvious that it has to be, then decides to look at the particle, then that's a measurement, and then you apply the formalism, and depending on which property you measure, like you can measure position, energy, momentum,
spin
or angular momentum, and all these properties. Depending on which you measure, the mathematics, then you can then do the mathematics, and then you can, from this, you can calculate the possible outcomes of this measurement and the probabilities.
See, I think what's interesting about what you just said is that a lot of people listening to this, even though they're quite conversant in a lot of mystical religious traditions, etc., would be surprised that from a scientific point of view the suggestion is that there are no physical building blocks. Was that specifically stated, or was that just inferred?
Yeah, it's kind of inferred if you do the quantum mechanics.
And was there any surprise in the students at that, or did anybody kind of scratch their head and go, wait a minute, I thought there were these little balls that made up everything?
Yeah, I suppose most of us think that at the beginning. It's just a picture we have in our heads of objects.
So did you thought that before you did the course?
I think I knew that already by then, because
Right.
I'd done a lot of reading, and
Okay,
so
so
I wasn't surprised, but maybe others were.
As you say, you've done a lot of reading, so you knew that, but most people do, I would say, there's some little people, most people do not know that there are no fundamental building blocks. They think that there are these little tiny balls, and you put them together, and that's carbon, and that's this, and that's hydrogen, and that's this, but that's not the case.
The chemistry books always depict little balls, but
but they had theoretical, mathematical models.
Yeah, they're just models, these balls, they're nothing.
As is described in a lot of Tibetan Buddhist traditions, that what we're dealing with is just a flow of energy that comes out of the flow and then goes into a specific formulation of energy, and we call that a particle or a wave. Now, where does this stuff come from?
Yeah, that's relativity that treats matter as energy. In quantum mechanics, energy is just another observable. You can measure it, and while you're not making a measurement, the particle doesn't have a defined energy. But once you make a measurement, then it takes on a certain energy, and then there's nothing there when you're not making a measurement.
So that's even more interesting. Yeah, there's nothing there when there's no measurement, i.e. no consciousness. But you said earlier that wasn't specifically said, consciousness, but obviously there's got to be a conscious thing to do a measurement.
Yeah.
So,
it's a so-called measurement problem, and many people have come up with different interpretations of quantum mechanics to kind of like the many worlds interpretation cuts out consciousness, but it postulates all these other.
And what do you feel
worlds.
about that?
I don't believe it. It's a way to get. It's an attempt to get back to the mechanistic picture of the world, the many worlds thing, and I don't believe it.
And that's the MWI interpretation, and the what's it called? Everett many worlds theory.
Yeah.
But you don't buy that. You think it doesn't work like that. So tell us what you think.
I think that it's our consciousness which makes the measurements that the fundamental postulates speak of. Then there's no need for the many worlds interpretation if you just use that.
So if you take consciousness away, where does that leave the rocks around us when there's no consciousness in this long barrow in West Canada? What's here when we're not here?
Nothing at all. No particles, not even space and time. If you, according to new loop quantum gravity, which I believe in. But
I've got a question there, and how does it that if one observer leaves here and it's not been observed and it's nothing here, and how does another observer come along and then as a result make all these rocks go back into exactly the same space that we left them in?
Yeah, that's because of the mathematical rules of quantum mechanics. If you measure a particle and it's here, and then if you go away, then in the position representation you have this wave function. It will gradually maybe spread out, but if there are potentials and other particles are confining it, doesn't spread out much, and then you have a probability which is maybe a kind of blob around it. And then if another observer comes and makes a measurement, the probability is very high that it would be close to where it was before.
Right. It's all about probability. It will maintain the state in which it was last observed.
Yeah, depending on the situation.
So if somebody came in here who was mentally unstable, would that have any effect if their consciousness was disturbed? It's probably not a good question to ask with me and Niall here, actually.
That's true. I think we've got a couple of those shamanic anarchists here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fascinating. I mean, that's really interesting, because I wondered whether, there's still a very mechanistic view and there's still consciousness was a no-go area. But from what you just said, that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
It's part and parcel of quantum mechanics. It cannot be ignored, can it?
Yeah, well, some physicists can ignore it, like the many words.
But your tutors and lecturers and what have you, they were quite specific and open with all this information.
I didn't actually talk to them about it. They just taught us the mathematics and the formulas, and they didn't say what they believe in the interpretation side.
Did you get any sort of many worlds fundamentalists and anti-many worlds fundamentalists, like religious scientific fanatics in coming in and out of these colleges, though?
Well, I don't know. I just went to the lectures and talked to all
very
the professors.
Yeah. I mean, you said you'd done some reading and you were interested beforehand, presumably, of course. Has it changed your view of the world, any of the stuff you've learned?
Yeah, it has, because what I read about in the books before was the wave mechanics, and the second lecture course, it took me to the real mathematical formalism that kind of did go beyond that. And it was before that you think, oh, if I'm not looking, there's a wave there, and then it collapses if you make a measurement.
Yeah.
So you think of this wave as being some stuff that's there if you're not looking.
Yeah.
But then this new formalism comes along and says, hey, this is just a representation of the mathematics, and this is actually just the mathematics and nothing else, and then kind of destroys that picture I had.
And does that make you feel more comfortable or less comfortable as an individual? The fact that consciousness is a key thing holding everything together.
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah, I suppose so.
So it kind of means we're all God on some level, really, isn't it?
Yeah. The consciousness is what constructs it all, but it's not necessarily in our brain, is it? It's just conducted through us.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the good things I think about quantum physics is that it's iconoclastic, in the sense that it will get orthodox scientism as a fundamentalism, orthodox religion as a fundamentalism. It just kind of completely debunks them all, complete backed with concrete evidence. It just completely trashes.
Because it's funny, isn't it? I don't know about you, Niall, but Anna seems completely comfortable with this, completely relaxed with it, and it surprises me that, and it also delights me as well, because most young people just simply have no interest in this stuff, don't even use the word consciousness or whatever, so it's kind of heartening in a way that you're so at ease with that, because I know a lot of people, particularly perhaps our age, and both in our late 30s, aren't we, that you say that when you look away, this thing is a waveform and doesn't essentially have any solid existence, and they just look at you, wouldn't they, and think, what on earth are you talking about? And yet that is the case.
Yeah, people become sort of indoctrinated into this version of reality that we take, as real, and they forget that there's anything apart from that, and they even look at you like there's something wrong with you if you talk about anything deeper than who shot who on EastEnders last week. Or something.
That's right. But it's also interesting, isn't it, that I don't know if you felt this during the years you've been studying, but there are some similarities, I feel, between pretty cutting-edge quantum physics and ancient mystical traditions that say everything is this one flowingness, and it's only our mind that brings it into material existence. And you could have read that in sort of 4,000-year-old scripture, and yet in the terms you've put it, what I hear is a very similar thing. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'd heard about that before. And knowing about all those mystic things before, it did kind of help me then when I learned about the quantum mechanics formalism to understand, it's just conscious making the measurements, nothing exists, and that's no problem. It took my mind a while to kind of get to grips with.
That's what I mean. The mind sometimes needs data, doesn't it, just to do it, but it can't kind of twig it all together. I mean, my mind is more kind of from the old style mystical thing. I don't necessarily need proof and data, but in communicating the messages that I do, and I kind of write, that's what I do, I write essays and so on, I found it more helpful and constructive to give data to people who do need science and who do need evidence, like say intelligent guy like my father, for example. It would be important for him to know what you've just said, and that would make it much easier for him to enjoy a book about Toltec shamanism, because he could see, well, those things do have a relationship, but he would need that data because he has a materialist mindset.
Well, I mean, I don't know much about this, because when it comes to academic stuff, I'm a bit of a dunce myself.
Why is that? What happened after secondary school then?
Well,
personal question, you don't have to answer that.
No, it's all right. I think I just kind of got more interested in being a dropout. Yeah. But then,
you obviously you've read and consumed a lot of information since then, so you've just started to educate yourself independently, effectively.
Yeah,
right?
so I think when I went to India, just shortly before I went to India, I did get a little interest in. It came from a more new agey start, and that combined with the psychedelic thing, and I travelled. But I think that experience I had as a kid, which could have been, related, it wouldn't be completely alien to something like quantum physics, because nothing and no one, and even still no one, can explain how a childhood fear brought on by a 1970s rock opera could actually change the flavour of food, and so...
I love that,
yeah.
Only you could come out with quite a sentence like that.
Yeah.
All right.
So it was like, for me, it was kind of like reality in its consistent form was deconstructed to me at an early age, and sort of like just by narrow escape, it didn't turn me into a psychotic. So to me, that was kind of something changed, like some weird kind of firmware upgrade at the age of 7.
Well, it's interesting how people learn to me, because I would find it very difficult to do a degree in physics, because it's just not the way I do things. It's interesting how people learn. I mean, my education after high school was art college. Mine was like painting massive pictures of human bodies and abstract expressionism and stuff. And my scientific understanding, my kind of left brain emanations didn't come until I would say the mid-20s, when I went out and bought books myself. I have this kind of loose working theory that some information only comes to you at a certain point in your life, and it only resonates with you at a certain point in your life. Like, I have this joke with a friend of mine that you only start liking white wine after the age of 30, and up until then it just tastes like shit, basically. And similarly, you only start liking gardening after the age of 50, and until then it's just something that you may or may not be interested in. And similarly, physics is only worked for me when I was like 25, 28, 29. It started to become important. So I don't know, maybe the information finds its way to you rather than the other way around.
Yeah. Well, there was something I left out when you're talking about. I've completely overlooked it. That my left brain was taken up a lot by sound engineering. I was writing and recording music. So, and I took an interest in production because I wanted to make my music actually sound like it had been recorded professionally. So,
that's quite integrated, though, isn't it? Because it's creative and it's technical.
Yeah, it's a good. What you were saying on Henrik's show about the left and the right brain being unified, that's a good example.
It is. And again, playing a musical instrument, it's one of the few things you do where you get quite equal spread of left-right brain neuron firing, I believe. Yeah. So it's a quite healthy, harmonious thing to do.
Yeah, I mean it's true. I mean I get that from my flatmate Angela, who plays the violin.
Yeah,
so she does seem quite balanced. She's a classical violinist. But what I found was that when I was doing the sound engineering, I'd be getting the hi-hat, panning it to the left, getting the ride cymbal, panning it to the right, getting the
a real one or a synthetic one?
If I was using drum machines, I'd do that. But on a few occasions I recorded drums, I was quite, I kind of got that together anyway. So there would be the whole point of being able to make sure that all the drums would be in the right side. There'd be the thing where you'd record a guitar, you put it through an effects pedal, you get a riff, record it twice, pan it hard left and hard right, and then create pseudo stereo out of two separate recordings of the same thing in unison. There would be things where you would get one signal, create a split-second delay, put it on the other side and create a pseudo-stereo delay. There'd be like reverbs, flanges, phasers, chorus pedals, compressors, all that. You've got an enormous amount of things in this massive soundscape. You've got to put... some things have to be mono, some things have to be stereo, some things have to be phase inverted. And so very, very complex. And
that's stimulating largely the left brain.
Yeah.
It's not strictly true left and right brain, but for the sake of this conversation, it's a largely left brain. And yet, music is fundamentally a right brain product, isn't it?
Well, as you're listening to the effects of the phaser and the reverbs and all the things that are making the music come to life, that's triggering off something in the right brain while you're using the left brain to the technical side. So it does both together, and So I suppose so. But it's what you call creatively applied physics.
Yeah,
that's sort of what that is, and a good combination of stuff. But you said that you had a guitar teacher.
I did. If you're a kind of virtuoso jazz musician, which he was, he teaches you how to fret properly. Instead of putting your thumb over the top of the fretboard, like if you're strumming chords, your thumb is permanently really behind the fretboard. So on the back, the smooth part of the back of the neck. So you end up with this great power and dexterity in your fingers. So, in a lot of metal music and technical music, like, there's a band I like called Opeth, who are a Swedish death metal band. You just can't play that unless you are of a very high standard musician. So, if you watch those guys, you see all this hair windmilling around and stuff. But when you watch the activity on the fretboard, it is super, super high quality, better than anything you see in the mainstream.
Yeah.
And that technique comes from jazz or whatever. So yeah, it was good. So there's a crossover there.
Yeah, I think all crossovers are good. I found when I was in India though that I went to Varanasi, and the people who were learning to play sarengis and tabla and sitars, they all seem to be brainwashed with this sort of like ideology that Western music was all false because it was at 440 kilohertz, that all fusion of music was wrong. And that really put me off, actually. I couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, it kept Indian music pure to what it was, but it did give out a really sort of like dodgy meme, you know. They all sounded like they were singing from the same hymn sheet, all the students that you met, I noticed. You know, and if you talked about fusion, they'd give you a dirty look and exclude you from the conversations from then on. So I didn't think India would be like that. But I was going to ask, what about you, Anna? Did you have any creative, technical outlet of any kind, or artistic?
No, not really. I did play a recorder when I was very young, for a few years.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, if you've done such a technical thing at university or whatever, you know, how does your creative side express itself?
Doesn't express itself. I was just too busy at university.
Okay, fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. Right, we're going to have a quick break here because we're sitting here, incidentally, in West Kennet Longbarrow, and this next song that you can hear was recorded by Julian Cope on the Autogeddon album, and he was actually playing it right here, right now. See you after this. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that. That was Julian Cope, Paranormal in the West Country. What I was going to talk about now, we went to see a woman who called herself a master shaman who had practiced the Inca shamanism. I won't mention any names. And I got a sort of like big feeling of scepticism when I went there.
Why was that?
Well, she was calling herself a master shaman, or the PR people were calling her that. And she just went with it, and she had this whole PR thing that went with her. When she started talking about this sort of inward experience that she had, it didn't really sound any different from what I would experience myself. Although she mentioned ayahuasca a few times, it wasn't really the main point, and she did seem a bit cautious and cagey whenever I put my hand up and probed her a couple of times about it. She did seem a bit cautious about it. But there was a few things that left me feeling a bit cynical and sceptical, and one of those is that I think as Western people, we're still in a kind of late childhood, early adolescence of our shamanic culture that we're in, and I don't think anyone who's a Westerner could call themselves a shaman except for their own personal experiences that they had for any shamanic awakening. I don't think anyone could go around calling themselves a master shaman and not raise a lot of scepticism.
I think this has cropped up before on your show and some other shows and some other forums of discussion. The use of the word shaman, I think, is quite debatable sometimes, isn't it? But to call yourself a master shaman is even more contentious.
Yeah.
But as you say, what we do is shamanic, and what we do in other traditions is called sorcery, which has taken on negative connotations in recent times, but it isn't. Sorcery is moving energy around, just as in shamanism you move your energetic state from one place to another. We touched on this earlier off record, didn't we, that shamanism to me isn't necessarily a Native American or a Siberian or a Peruvian practice. Shamanism, as we understand the word in the broader sense, is the indigenous spiritual practice of every nation, whether you're from England or Germany or Ireland or wherever. Everybody has shamans. You know, the shamans had different names, they had different characteristics, but it was essentially a personal spiritual connection with the land. Right?
Yeah.
So the Druids in England were focused on a specific frequency, shall we say, and they had a specific affinity with the trees, the oaks in particular. But the Druids were shamans, and in the same way, other traditions have their own peoples. And as I said to someone recently, you know, in Australia, the shamans are referred to as clever men.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's what they're called. So I say, go and see the clever man. So you would go over to the edge of the village, and there would be a guy there who would change his state of consciousness, and he would be able to retrieve lost objects, locate water, and do the service to community that many shamans often do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not necessarily something that is geographically specific. It is. I think it's the indigenous birthright of all continents, really, and all people. So talking about re-shamanising the West is significant, because it's bringing back that confidence, really, to say this is an important part of life. In the West, it's been disconnected, and it's time to correct that.
Yeah, well, I see it as I mentioned this before, bits of furniture missing from culture. Like, you go into the Toltec front room, there'll be a sofa there. Go into an Inca front room, there'll be a sofa there. Go to the Siberian indigenous one, there'll be a sofa there. The Peyote people will have their sofa. Go into the West, there's a bare floor. And that's kind of what I see at the moment.
There's an empty room here.
Yeah, there's lots of other furnitures, but the shamanic piece of furniture is missing.
So we don't see many white shamans to just put it down to skin doing right now.
No.
There aren't that many.
No, there's not that many. And I've been trying to think of it over the longer term time scale. And what my theory here is that this is something that woke up in the Western collective thing and the Jungian collective thing. It might have happened through Carl Jung and through Freud as well, but it would have happened through the first German scientists who brought peyote back to Germany and synthesised mescaline in the late sort of Victorian era, I think, or Edwardian era. They would have done that then. And although it didn't take on for, when Albert Hofmann started synthesising LSD, that was one of those miracles, because he could quite easily have not done that. He just had a hunch. Right back to people like Huxley and Leary and Terence McKenna and all that. And then to it leading to people like ourselves doing all these blogs and podcasts, becoming part of this continuation of that sort of 60s countercultural thing, but making it more sophisticated.
It is. It's more independent, isn't it? I think that's the thing that we have over that, is that the independent media was largely print-based in the 60s. Whereas now it's immediate, digital, mass acceptance. So people listen to your show all over the planet. I know you told me that you can see the map, and it's dead exciting and interesting to see where all the different people are coming from in every continent, and that's what's different. So I think it's no mistake that just as the disconnect, if you like, is at its most profound, that the technology reminds us that the connectivity is what we need. And my feeling is that as the internet recedes, it will be replaced by something that does not require technology, that will be using the natural abilities of mind and of spirit, where no wires and no digital devices are required.
Yeah, it would be very similar to your field uplink thing that you were talking about, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's using the field, and it's using the inherent power of the planet and the consciousness of the planet to connect and to swap data, to share experience, to understand that self really is a construct, but what we see behind that is this consciousness, and it's a single flowing unitary entity.
Yeah. And I also see that as time goes on, as generations go on, the ideas have got better. Because, when you were talking about field uplink, it probably couldn't have come to you if you hadn't seen The Matrix, maybe. Because that whole... You mentioned in Henrik's programme about, show me how to fly this helicopter, and then it's downloaded into her head.
Well, it is. The Matrix is a brilliant metaphor. I think, to be honest, it really is just different words for what I was reading in the 80s before then, from Castaneda in particular, who's still extremely valuable work, regardless of the origins of that text, and what's imaginal and what's actual is irrelevant to me. I think that the whole idea of the field is, from what Anna was saying earlier, can come to some other people from a different place to say, well, this is fascinating. The inferences of what we've just done in university for 3 years means that reality isn't possible without consciousness, and that only grows in how profoundly that affects every moment of your life. And it's just brilliant that you encounter it so young, because most people don't. Most people are working back to that from the age of 50 onwards. Yeah.
Well, this is my next the next thing on my point about the re-shamanisation of our culture is I noticed with Anna, and I'd say she's still in her early 20s and we're late 30s. So that means that in about 15 years' time, there'll be other people like you, Anna. There'll be other podcasts. There'll be more, how can I say, sophisticated digital medium. There might be other problems at the time. There'll be new concepts that don't exist now, and you'll be taking them over. Just in the same way that Neil's talking about field uplink, and we're talking in this kind of technical and technological way of our era, and how it seems to be in advance of what Terence McKenna was talking about, because he was limited to the technology of the 1990s.
That's right.
But in Terence McKenna, what he was talking about, how it was much better in a lot of ways than Tim Leary, because Tim Leary was, from that original pop culture thing, pre-computers, pre-everything digital. And then I was thinking that, the next generation after that, the people who aren't born yet, will have concepts. And at some point within the next 70 to 100 years, then at that point, in my model that I'm looking at now, that magical sofa will appear, and they'll be the first people who will be able to say that they're true Western shamans, and it's a culture that goes back a century to the 1960s, because it'll be the 2060s.
Well, it is, and it's all about, to use your Matrix metaphor, it's about upgrades, isn't it? And I think that this brings us back to full circle to the crop circles, if you pardon the pun.
Yeah.
The crop circles, standing inside a crop circle is an upgrade. It's a firmware upgrade for consciousness. It's a temple that is there for 20 days in the crop, and then it's gone. And if you want data, that's there. If you want a more kind of paradoxical, paradigm shifting experience, that's there as well. I would say that each particular glyph offers the potential of an upgrade. So you have to, seeing it is good, but being inside it is better. And I think there is a lot of physical evidence to show that there's potential for upgrade as well. And some work better than others. Some glyphs that I've been inside do nothing except offer beauty, which is, is good enough. And it brings me into a beautiful landscape. Others, conversely, have a profound effect, and I can feel it. I can feel the hair on the back of my arm standing up. I can feel tingling down my spine. And it's there, it's resonant for different people, and each one has its own signature. So if you need an upgrade and you're kind of running, an Apple Mac, it's not going to work on your Windows Vista machine or whatever. So it's specific for different people, so it's always wise to kind of check out a few different ones, because they all have a particular feel and they all work differently with our own particular frequency vibration, and that has been proven again this year. So over the past 3 years I've seen an inordinate amount of circles, and I would say there's probably only a handful that have really, really affected me. And I've made a note of those, and I've made a note of the geometry in those, and they do represent in my life, when I look at what's happened in and around those experiences, they have been upgrades.
Yeah. No, I think I might have accidentally stumbled into one of them myself a few years ago. I had this bliss feeling that I wanted it forever to be now, and that now is eternally blissful. I got that from a crop circle once, and it reminded me of a childhood thing. I never spoke to everyone about my visionary bliss I had the year after the War of the Worlds thing, but I did have a visionary bliss.
But it's a teaching, isn't it, to revisit that as a more informed adult now, to say that bliss is an important part of the human experience. So the circle gives you that upgrade, that the information, you may have been able to put that together previously, but its influence on your life and its meaning is a profound teaching. So those are subjectively experienced by us all, so that's why they work differently for different people. And these are, as we should stress, the authentic quote unquote circles, not the ones that are made by human artists, shall we say, putting it diplomatically.
Alright, we'll have to come to the end of that one now, because we're, the time gentlemen please, as they say in pubs over here. Alright, well cheers for taking time to meet us here in Avebury anyway, Neil.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, it's been good interview, nice day, and good spending time with you two guys.
Yeah, cool. Cheers for coming on the podcast, Anna.
My pleasure. Mathematical properties, but it's an entirely mathematical object.
What you're saying, does that mean that what you're talking about is purely a mathematical construct? It's not actually a thing?
Yeah, vector and Hilbert space is purely mathematical construct.
Okay, so do they go into the fact that actually the atomic structure is just theoretical?
Yeah, it's just mathematics.
In what you've learned during your degree, would you say that there are no building blocks as such? That's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, you have this whole mathematical formalism, and you have a particle. Well, you need to say particles, otherwise you can't talk about it. It's a mathematical object called a vector in Hilbert space, which is just terminology you don't need to know. And if a conscious observer, the formalism of course doesn't mention consciousness, but it's kind of obvious that it has to be, then decides to look at the particle, then that's a measurement, and then you apply the formalism, and depending on which property you measure, like you can measure position, energy, momentum,
spin
or angular momentum, and all these properties, depending on which you measure the mathematics, then you can then do the mathematics, and then you can, from this, you can calculate the possible outcomes of this measurement and the probabilities.
See, I think what's interesting about what you just said is that a lot of people listening to this, even though they're quite conversant in a lot of mystical religious traditions, etc., would be surprised that from a scientific point of view the suggestion is that there are no physical building blocks. Was that specifically stated, or was that just inferred?
Yeah, it's kind of inferred if you do the quantum mechanics.
And was there any surprise in the students at that, or did anybody kind of scratch their head and go, wait a minute, I thought there were these little balls that made up everything?
Yeah, I suppose most of them thought, most of us think that at the beginning. It's just a picture. Experiments like a double slit can demonstrate that this picture of a particle is wrong.
Yeah, because when you were saying before, you were saying it as like a wave state and a particle state, but even that is just a sort of field of probability, not an actual thing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, the wave, you often hear about that in popular science, like quantum mechanics treatments, about the wave and the wave going through both slits, but actually that's what we first learned in the first year lecture course in quantum mechanics is wave mechanics. You have to fit a wave to the potential, and then from the wave function you can calculate things. But then in the next course, more advanced course, I learned that actually this wave, it's just the position representation of the mathematical object, which is actually the particle. Mathematical objects, it's called a vector in Hilbert space, which means it's just actually an element of a mathematical set, and the set has certain
Right, welcome to the Shamanic Freedom on Location, and this is the second podcast in a row that we're with Neil Kramer, and this rather ingenious idea manifested itself. That is that my girlfriend Anna, who's just done a degree in physics, knows an enormous amount of stuff about physics that a lot of us in the psychedelic community would like to be able to know, and she'll be able to answer a few of Neil Kramer's questions. One of those situations has just appeared, so I'm going to leave them. The next 20 minutes is I shall shut my cake hole and let Neil and Anna do the talking. So yeah, welcome both of you to Shamanic Freedom Radio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I feel all right. Yeah.
Yeah, what I thought would be interesting, because I think I heard you mention when you were, was it at the October Gallery, and you were with Anna and you were there, and you said that you were doing physics. Oh, that'd be interesting, you know, it'd be nice to meet her one day, and here we all are. So what interests me is that in the last year I've seen quite a few things in like popular science magazines and, you know, New Scientist and all that kind of stuff, that's suggesting that in terms of actual matter, i.e. particulate matter, there really isn't any. And we just briefly mentioned that, didn't we, before, and you said, yeah, that's right, it's all theoretical. Tell us a bit about that, because I think that is very relevant to the mystical world of the shaman, if you like, which we've just talked about a lot on this show. Just tell us about the science of actual particles and why there isn't anything there.
Yeah, it's the way that quantum mechanics work. It's if you look at the fundamental postulates, they talk about is the results of measurements that can be made on the particle. There's not really a particle. So when you're not making a measurement, there's just nothing there. You can't